Welcome to History Nest, where the past whispers you to sleep. Imagine this. Standing in the shadow of enormous stone columns, you can see the scars left by desperate chisel marks on their surfaces. The dust, which tastes like broken limestone and unanswered prayers, is heavy in the desert heat. Workers pound away at old walls all around you, destroying faces, names, and whole histories etched into the stone. The roar reverberates through Karanak's deserted hallways like thunder. Another fragment of a revolution that once promised to change the world is erased with every blow. It is the year 1334 BC. The Pharaoh, who dared to defy 3,000 years of custom, is no longer among us. His city is deserted. They have forgotten his god, and as though he never existed, his name Akhenaten, the one who pleased the Akhenaten, being methodically chipped out of every Egyptian surface. However, 18 years prior, this same man was the world's most powerful king, leading armies from the Euphrates to Nubia. He looked at the sun disk and said that all his forefathers had thought was false. Prior to delving into this lost tale of heavenly transformation and kinship ties that astounded even ancient Egypt, consider clicking the like button and subscribing for more posts like this if you like discovering the little-known facts about the past. Additionally, kindly let me know where you're listening by leaving a comment below. It's amazing to me that we're studying these old tales from around the globe together, bound together by our mutual interest in the past and transcending time and location. Silently, the change started. Amenhotep IV, a youthful prince, became the heir apparent to the Egyptian monarchy in 1353 BC. His father, Amenhotep III, had ruled for 38 years in an extraordinary period of wealth, leaving behind a kingdom that spanned the known world and temples that gleamed with gold. The youthful pharaoh ought to have been happy to continue on the course his forefathers had taken for thousands of years, paying respect to Amun-Ra, the ruler of the gods, and upholding the cosmic order that had long favored Egypt. But this young monarch had a burning inside. Maybe it was the intensity of his eyes as he watched the sun rise over the Nile in the morning. The priest's rumors that Aten, the solar disk, was more than just another face of Ra might have been the source, or it might have been something more profound, a voice that spoke from the sun's own core, or a vision that appeared to him in dreams. In the early 1350s BC, the court at Thebes was a dazzling display of authority and long-standing custom. The city was dominated by enormous temple complexes, with pylons that rose against the desert sky like man-made mountains. Thousands of priests, scribes, artisans, and servants worked at the temple of Karak alone. From Lebanon, lapis lazuli; from Afghanistan, ivory; from the heart of Africa, and tribute from conquered territories filled its treasury to overflowing. In addition to ruling over religious life, the high priest of Amun controlled enormous estates that contributed significantly to Egypt's wealth, giving him power that rivaled that of the pharaoh himself. A young guy who would question everything entered this ancient world. Physically, Amenhotep IV was tall and lanky, with an extended skull, narrow shoulders, and wide hips that gave him an androgynous appearance, according to contemporary sources. Even as a young man, the prince deviated from the conventional image of Egyptian kingship, but later, painters would exaggerate these features to nearly obscene proportions. His schooling would have been in line with the centuries-old norms set for royal children. He studied astronomy and mathematics, learned to read and write hieroglyphs, and was trained in statecraft and military strategy. However, there were seeds of revolution sown somewhere in this traditional curriculum. He may have first heard the hymns to On that would eventually motivate his metamorphosis in the temple schools. Perhaps the news of monotheistic stirrings in far-off places was brought up in discussions with foreign officials. Amenhotep IV had started building temples to the Aten at Karna itself by the time he was in his 4th year as pharaoh. The youthful king raised this small sun deity above their ancient god, causing the priests to watch with increasing alarm in the shadow of Amen's largest sanctuary. The earliest indications of revolution were found in art rather than declarations. Egyptian sculptures, inflexible, timeless stances, gave way to something shockingly intimate. The royal family was shown in relief carvings beneath the Aten's extended rays. The anchor of life is offered by each ray that ends in a small hand. It is challenging to perceive the revolutionary nature of these early creative achievements now. Egyptian art had adhered to rigorous rules for 3,000 years in order to depict timeless truth rather than fleeting appearances. Pharaohs were consistently depicted in idealized images, youthful, physically flawless, and positioned to highlight their heavenly attributes. Viewers of the time must have been astonished by the unexpected arrival of art that expressed true human emotion and caught particular moments in time rather than timeless ideals. In these pictures, his queen, Nefertiti, stood beside him as a real, breathing woman rather than a far-off symbol of grandeur. In the Egyptian royal dynasty, marriage alliances were usually set up for political purposes, but according to modern sources, Akhenaten and Nefertiti had a sincere love affair that was unheard of in royal partnerships. Under the protective eye of their new god, their daughters, Meriton, Mekerten, Enkenparten, and the others who would come were portrayed as actual kids, reaching out to their parents while having fun. Anka certain means she lives for the Aten, whereas Meriton means loved of the Aten. Akhenaten made theological claims, even when he chose names for his daughters, claiming that they were living manifestations of divine favor rather than just members of the royal family. When the young king's first daughter was born around 1350 BC, these names would turn out to be prophetic in ways that he could not have predicted. The moon's priests became agitated. They had dominated Egypt's spiritual life for 3 millennia. Their god held the majority of Egypt's tribute, ruled over enormous estates, and commanded the biggest temples. With hundreds of gods, detailed creation myths, and elaborate funerary procedures that promised perpetual life to those who could afford appropriate mummification and burial. The mythology around a moon was impossible to comprehend. A youthful Pharaoh was now implying that their complex system, which served as the basis for Egyptian civilization, was merely superstitious. The effects of Akhenaten's religious reforms on the economy were profound. More than 80,000 slaves, 420,000 animals, and 900 square miles of agricultural land were owned by the Temple of Amen at Karnak alone. The priesthood was not just a dominant religious group, but also a major economic force in Egypt, controlling around 1/3 of all arable land. By placing Akhenaten above Amen, Akhenaten was threatening to undermine an economic system that had functioned smoothly for millennia. Amenhotep IV made a historic proclamation during his 5th year in power. The moniker Thathenard Ammonite would no longer be applied to him. He would now be referred to as Akhenaten, which means effective for the Artan or devoted to the Artan. Nefe-Neferwan was the new name for his queen, Nefertiti. The Artan's beauty is stunning. New names honoring their god were given to their girls. They would even change their city. However, change alone was insufficient. By the 6th year of his reign, Akhenaten had made a choice that frightened his subjects and stunned his court. He would completely leave Thebes behind. He would construct a brand new metropolis just for the Akhenaten, somewhere between Memphis in the north and Robbers in the south. He dubbed this location the Akhenaten Horizon. Giving up Thebes was not a hasty decision. For more than 500 years, the city served as Egypt's governmental and ecclesiastical hub. The ancestors of Akhenaten were buried in its temples. The administrative apparatus that ran an empire was headquartered in its palaces. Additionally, it was home to the most accomplished artisans and skilled scribes in antiquity. It showed either hazardous megalomania or extreme confidence to abandon all of this for a barren desert. The location he selected was in an area that had not seen much prior habitation and was on the east bank of the Nile, roughly 200 meters north of Thebes. A natural amphitheater was created by the limestone cliffs that surrounded the site. Additionally, the sun appeared to rise straight from these cliffs every morning, producing a daily miracle that strengthened his beliefs. Additionally, the new city would be free from connections to the ancient gods due to the virgin area, providing a blank canvas on which to write his revolutionary vision. With a workforce that may have numbered in the tens of thousands, construction got underway right away. Limestone for the city's foundations was obtained by opening quarries in the nearby cliffs. More exotic materials, such as granite from Maswan, sandstone from Nubia, and cedarwood from Lebanon, were brought in from all over the empire. The enormous amounts of stone and timber needed for the building were transported by the Nile. Using a cutting-edge construction method, Akhenaten was constructed incredibly quickly. Instead of using the enormous stones used in traditional Egyptian construction, the architects used standard stone blocks colletto-lotted, which were around 20 by 10 by 15 inches and could be mined, transported, and erected considerably more quickly because these blocks were manageable for one man to carry. Work could proceed quickly without sacrificing the majestic size characteristic of royal architecture. The fundamental infrastructure was finished in 2 years. Court officials, residences, palaces, temples, and administrative structures for those who had followed their pharaoh into the desert. The metropolis extended more than 5 miles down the Nile, with residential districts running north and south, and the regal precincts filling the center. The king could move from his official dwelling to his private apartments without leaving the royal precinct, thanks to a royal road that connected the several palace buildings. Covering an area of about 800 by 300 meters, the magnificent temple of the Atom dominated the center of the city. This temple was completely exposed to the sky, in contrast to traditional Egyptian temples, which were enigmatic, dark spaces with an inner sanctuary that was only accessible by priests. There were hundreds of offering tables placed in tidy rows around the compound, which was made up of a number of courtyards connected by columned halls. The sun's beams reached every part of the hallowed area because there were no walls to hinder them. There were no secret ceremonies, no hidden chambers, and no complex mythology to decipher. The sun itself was the god, and everyone could see it without the need for middlemen. For its time, the theology of atonism, as it evolved in Akhenaten, was extraordinarily complex. In contrast to the hundreds of gods with intricate relationships and conflicting narratives found in the old Egyptian pantheon, atonism proposed a single, all-powerful creator god whose might was revealed by the visible sun. The Aten was characterized as the sustainer of the natural universe, the origin of all life, and the creator of all countries and peoples. The epic hymn to the Aten, which may have been written by Akhenaten himself and is engraved on the courtier's tomb, sheds light on the new religion's sophisticated theology. How numerous your creations are! They are concealed from human view. There is no other sole deity like you. When you were by yourself, you did design the world the way you wanted it. All people, animals, and wild animals, as well as anything on the ground, moving on 2 feet, and anything in the air, using its wings. Because of the striking similarities between this hymn and Psalm 104 in the Hebrew Bible, some academics have theorized that atonism and early monotheistic traditions in the ancient Near East may be related. In the context of ancient polytheism, the focus on a single all-encompassing creator god who actively preserves the natural world was innovative. Akhenaten relocated his whole court to this new capital during his 9th year as pharaoh. The royal family moved into a huge palace complex along the river that spanned more than a mile. Channels carried Nile water throughout the city, and gardens grew with trees and flowers brought in from all across the empire. Pools reflected the sky above, giving the impression that the atom's light could reach even below rooms. And aviaries held exotic birds from Syria and Nubia, just as innovative as the city's theology was the royal palace's architecture. The fortress-like architecture of traditional Egyptian palaces was intended to highlight the pharaoh's distance from common people. In contrast, the palace at Akhenaten had expansive windows, open courtyards, and gardens that allowed nature to enter the center of the royal home. An atmosphere thought emphasized the natural world over human strength was created by the painted reliefs that adorned the chambers, depicting flora and animals in realistic detail. Life in Akhenaten must have been both thrilling and unnerving for the courtiers who had accompanied their monarch to this desert city. The experiment they were taking part in was unprecedented in human history. Endeavor to totally restructure a society according to a new religious philosophy, with intricate rituals synchronized with the sun's path across the sky. The worship of the Aten constituted the daily rhythm of court life. The royal family and court gathered in the vast temple to greet the rising light, and morning worship started before daybreak. Priests sang hymn honoring the Aten's daily resurrection as the first rays of light fell on the offering tables. Under the open sky, the king and queen presented their deity with bread, beer, meat, and flowers, while courtiers, in rigid hierarchical order, joined in the communal feast, timed to coincide with the sun's zenith, when the Apennin's power was at its highest. The afternoon ceremony was similarly elaborate. As the sun sank behind the western cliffs, evening worship became more solemn, recognizing the fleeting victory of darkness while expressing faith in the return of light. These daily rituals gave court life structure while consistently reiterating the core tenet of Phism that all life and power originated from the visible sun. The intricacies of royal succession, however, required consideration even in paradise. Akhenaten had 6 daughters by Nefertiti, but no boy to take the throne. This created a problem in the inflexible world of Pharaoh Egypt that needed unheard-of answers. The new kingdom's succession regulations were intricate, taking into account not just blood ties, but also political and religious credentials. A pharaoh had to be able to uphold Egypt's reputation abroad, be approved by the military, and be acknowledged by the priesthood. The religious movement in Akhenaten exacerbated the issue. To keep the old faith from being restored after his death, any heir would have to be fervently devoted to Azim. This disqualified a large number of possible heirs from cadet branches of the royal family whose theological beliefs were dubious, but who could have been acceptable in other situations, although they were based on patterns set by Akhenaten's own father and other new kingdom pharaohs. The solution took the shape of groupings that would have been startling even by the standards of ancient Egypt. Although there were examples of father-daughter marriages in dire situations and sibling weddings among pharaohs were common, the organized structure of Akhenaten family arrangements was unprecedented. In order to preserve his theological revolution and secure his dynasty, Akhenaten turned to his daughters after Nefertiti vanished from the historical record, inexplicably around the pharaoh's 12th year. It is unclear whether this was due to death, disgrace, or her change into a co-ruler with a different name. The procedure started quietly. Meriton, Akhenaten's eldest daughter, starts to show up in roles often held by the queen in reliefs depicting his later years. She is depicted wearing the royal regalia, receiving the Artan's life-giving rays, and standing next to her father during religious ceremonies. She had formally assumed the title of chief queen by the 13th year of Akhenaten's rule, which included ceremonial responsibilities as well as the expectation of bearing royal heirs. When Meriton assumed the role of her father's queen, she was most likely 16 years old. Her sentiments towards this arrangement are not revealed by contemporary archives, although it is hard to understand the psychological intricacy of her circumstances. She had been exposed to literature and art that praised the close ties of family life. While growing up in the avant-garde setting of Akhenaten, she was depicted as a cherished daughter, playing with her sisters under the protective rays of the Akhenaten in the sweet household scenes that adorned the royal walls. In order to become the same man's daughter and wife, she was now expected to convert her filial love into conjugal devotion. Although this arrangement's theological rationale was intricate, it was fundamentally consistent with Akhenaten's religious framework. In royal hymns, Akhenaten was portrayed as the mother and father of all creation, possessing both male and feminine qualities. This cosmic unity was supposed to be reflected in the royal family, who were the earthly embodiments of heavenly power. Akhenaten's marriage to his daughter was an earthly manifestation of divine self-generation, proving that the royal house possessed all the creative forces required for ongoing domination. Equally significant were the practical ramifications. The male heir Akhenaten sorely needed to carry on his religious revolution might be born from each girl who rose to the throne. Furthermore, he shielded his religious changes from other branches of the royal line by limiting succession to his personal relatives. With the bloodline of both pharaoh and queen, any child born to these couplings would be doubly royal, representing an unprecedented concentration of divine authority in Egyptian history. Akhenaten held the position of chief queen for almost 3 years. She frequently appears in diplomatic correspondence and temple reliefs during this era, indicating that her function went beyond simple ceremonial duties. The king's daughter, the queen, is mentioned in the Amana letters, suggesting that foreign diplomats were aware of her high position. Although the information is conflicting and the future of any children is undetermined, it is possible that she gave birth during this time. The situation became even more complicated around the 15th year of Akhenaten's rule. Akhenaten wed Smek-Kher, an enigmatic individual who might have been Akhenaten's adopted heir, brother, or son. This marriage created a unique circumstance, where the daughter queen became concurrently the bride of 2 pharaohs, her father Akhenaten and his regent Smenkhkare. When seen in light of Akhenaten's diplomatic issues, the political reasoning behind this arrangement becomes more apparent. The kingdom described in the Amana letters is under growing pressure from both internal dissension and external foes. By the middle of his rule, invading armies had taken control of a number of Egyptian vassal cities in Palestine and Syria, and there were rumors of insurrection in Nubia. In order to manage military activities, while he concentrated on religious matters, the pharaoh required a regent. It seems that Smira, whose name means vigorous as the soul of Ra, was especially selected to supply this military leadership, in addition to establishing a possible line of succession that would protect Akhenaten's religious reforms. His marriage to Akhenaten validated his place in the royal family. Additionally, Akhenaten was able to pursue a fresh marriage that would further concentrate divine power within his lineage. Thanks to the arrangement, Akhenaten made Enkhparten, his next oldest daughter, the chief queen after Akhenaten wed Smenkhkare. This young woman, who was probably no older than 13 or 14, was at the epicenter of a last-ditch effort to use her family's bloodline to maintain her father's revolution. Her name, which translates to "she lives for the Aten," turned out to be prophetic in ways that captured the sorrows and aspirations of the Amana era. Furthermore, the most drastic change in Akhenaten's family structure occurred with Kasban's accession to the throne. The reliefs depicting Kasbuten next to her father-husband are among the most disturbing gardens from the Amana period. They show a prepubescent girl dressed in the regalia of queenship, standing beneath the rays of Thesan in a pose that resembles the earlier images of Nefertiti. In contrast to Akhenaten, who had at least reached physical maturity before becoming queen, and Kasbuten, who was still a child when she took on the responsibilities of royal marriage. One can only imagine the psychological pain caused by this setup. As a youngster, Enkhparten had witnessed her older sister's transition from sibling to stepmother, as well as the intricate dynamics of a court where family ties changed in response to political exigencies. She now had to undergo the same metamorphosis, expected to give up her identity as a daughter in favor of the more nuanced roles of wife, queen, and daughter. These arrangements had a human cost that went beyond the direct participants. Nefernefer, Tum-Tesherat, and Setepenra, Akhenaten's other daughters, lived in a palace where their sisters had taken on the role of stepmothers, and the conventional lines of family life had been blurred for the sake of spiritual abstraction. The older girls must have realized that their own futures might follow similar patterns, even though the youngest daughters would not have been mature enough to completely comprehend the implications of what was going on around them. These were not only ceremonial unions. Reliefs in Maria II's tomb at Amana depict what looks to be Akhenaten in private family settings with his daughter spouses, scenes reminiscent of the peaceful home life portrayed in previous pictures during his union with Nefertiti. Instead of merely political agreements, the artwork conveys the idea of true marriage connections. It depicts the king embracing his daughter queens, dining with them, and engaging in the personal customs of family life. Tragically, Akhenaten's death during this time period serves as proof of the physical truth of these interactions. Among the most profoundly impactful pictures in Egyptian art are the scenes depicting the young princess's death in the royal tomb. Midwives and attendants are shown encircling the deathbed scenario, while the royal family is shown grieving over a woman laying on a birthing bed. Akhenaten may have died in childbirth after giving birth to her father's child, as evidenced by the image of a wet nurse cradling a newborn baby. Akhenaten's partner's identity is still unknown based on the evidence that is currently available. But the fact that she died when Hadota marriages were being arranged within the royal family raises troubling concerns about what might have happened to other daughters who might have been in comparable relationships. In the ancient world, childbearing was risky, even in the best of situations, due to the high rates of mother and newborn death. Nevertheless, pregnancy at a very early age would have further amplified these dangers. The world outside of Akhenaten, meanwhile, was becoming more and more unstable. A pattern of disregard and perplexity in Egypt's foreign policy is evident in the diplomatic correspondence from Amana that was discovered in the wreckage of Akhenaten's foreign office. Vassal monarchs in Palestine and Syria sent frantic letters, pleading for military assistance against the invading armies. But the pharaoh, preoccupied with his family plans and religious experiments, never responded to "my kid, my God, my Lord, and the King." In one of his increasingly desperate letters, the ruler of Byblos wrote, "Message of Rapata. Your servant, the dirt at your feet. I fall at the feet of the monarch, my lord. 7 times, 7 times. I pray that the monarch would send archers and think about his city. The monarch, my lord, will lose all of his territories if there are no archers this year." In the Levant, monarchs made similar appeals. Jerusalem's Abdihaba described attacks on his region in several letters and begged for quick military support. When Hittite soldiers began attacking his realm, the king of Mitanni, Egypt's most significant regional ally, began to send more frantic messengers. When Akhenaten did respond, it was with ambiguous assurances of future assistance that never came to pass. A pharaoh who is becoming more and more detached from the day-to-day operations of running an empire is shown by the diplomatic letters. His inward concentration was on ensuring his dynasty through ever more intricate family arrangements and constructing his earthly paradise. Due to lack of usage, the massive military apparatus that his father, Amenhotep III, had constructed to rust. After noticing this vulnerability, Egypt's adversaries started to boldly explore the borders. The scenario within was similarly frightening. Despite going underground, the Amana priests who had been displaced had not vanished. Local priests continued to covertly worship the ancient gods in the provincial temples dotting the Nile Valley, anticipating the restoration of the old order. According to archaeological evidence, Amenism never made a significant impact on Egyptian society outside of the royal court. It's possible that the common people who were denied access to their familiar deities continued to practice their old religion in secret while ostentatiously supporting the Aten revolution. It was also becoming clear that the religious upheaval had disrupted the economy. The enormous temple estates that had been moved from Ammon to the At needed new staff members who were supportive of the new government. When trading partners refused to acknowledge the authority of Fatimist priests, traditional economic relationships, many of which had religious components, were upended. Other infrastructure projects across the kingdom suffered as a result of the focus on constructing and maintaining Akhenaten. The common people found little to adore in Akhenaten's movement. Unlike gods like Isis or Kat, the Akhenaten was a detached, cerebral deity who did not bring any personal comfort. Sterile, ritual-centered, only on the royal family's relationship with their solar deity, took the place of the ornate festivals and religious celebrations that had characterized Egyptian society. For ages, the comfort of guardian deities who might be invoked in times of need, the promise of eternal life for those who lived according to matter, and divine order were all things that conventional religion had offered to the average person. Only the Sundisk's distant beneficence was offered via atonism. In the early years of the rule, the artistic revolution that had appeared so liberated also started to take on unsettling traits. At once seen as a step towards realistic portraiture, the royal family's exaggerated physical features grew more hideous. Akhenaten's later life statues depict him with a broad hip, pendulous breasts, and an impossible-to-elongate cranium that erases any hint of masculine dominance. Regardless of whether these are symbolic of his androgynous religion or actual physical traits, they produced a kingly picture that was extremely unnerving to viewers in the modern era. Once endearing in its closeness, the artwork portraying the royal family's domestic life also got increasingly intricate as the familial dynamics became more complicated. Viewers had a hard time solving the visual puzzles presented by reliefs, depicting Akhenaten with numerous spouses and daughters, some of whom were also his children and queens. Because father-daughter weddings were not represented by the conventional iconography of Egyptian royal art, artists were forced to create their own visual languages, which frequently produced visually stunning but emotionally unsettling works. Cracks started to show in Akhenaten's earthly paradise as he approached the last years of his rule. Egypt's loss of authority over a large portion of its Asiatic empire further worsened the diplomatic position. He had fewer possible heirs and holes in his succession plans because several of his daughters had passed away, perhaps during childbirth. The co-regency with Smenkhar, which might have been set up to ensure military leadership continuity, lasted for only a few years, when that pharaoh also vanished from history for unknown reasons. The monarch, who had declared himself the only bridge connecting heaven and earth, was becoming more and more alone. After following him to Akhenaten, the great courtiers started to doubt their dedication to the revolution. It's possible that some have subtly started negotiating with the conventional priesthood in anticipation of the restoration of the old order. The new capital's opulence and refinement could not conceal the mounting sense that the experiment was not working. Later levels of Akhenaten provide archaeological evidence of growing social unrest and poverty inside the city. The residential areas are dilapidated and abandoned. but the magnificent palaces and temples were kept up. The studios of craftsmen who had previously created beautiful artwork and furnishings for the royal court were closed. The city's population, which may have reached a peak of 50,000 during its prime, started to dwindle as prospects for growth dwindled and the political climate grew increasingly unstable. Once revolutionary theological innovations started to solidify into strict orthodoxy. Increasingly repetitious graphics centered around the same themes replaced the early Manna period's impromptu, artistic originality. The royal family worshipping under the rays of the Aton. Life on earth is a gift from the sun. Participating in religious ceremonies are the king and his daughter queens, initially providing a more intimate and direct connection with God. Theology eventually became as rigid and hierarchical as the traditional Egyptian religion it had supplanted. Egypt's collapse was being noted by international observers. During this time, Hittite documents more disparagingly depict Egyptian weakness. Conventional allies started to doubt their alliances with a pharaoh who didn't appear to be able to defend his own realm, much less offer his vassals military assistance. With Akhenaten's growing emphasis on domestic matters, the lavish diplomatic unions and gift-giving that had defined Egyptian foreign policy under Amenhotep III all but vanished under his son. Around 1336 BC, Akhenaten passed away in his 17th year as pharaoh. His death's circumstances are still unknown. Court historians have not documented any dramatic deathbed scenes, signs of plague or other evident disease, or traces of violence. It's possible that his unrelenting quest for religious perfection just exhausted him, or perhaps the mounting demands of rulership and the psychological toll of his complicated family arrangements eventually got to him. He may have had a genetic abnormality, such as Marfan syndrome, or another ailment, which could explain his unique look and probably shorter lifespan, according to some data. Extreme inbreeding within the royal family during this time would have raised the risk of genetic issues, resulting in a vicious cycle where the very arrangements intended to maintain the purity of divine blood would have played a role in the biological demise of the dynasty. Neferraten, a shadowy figure who might have been Nefertiti, ruling under a different name, or perhaps one of his daughter queens taking over as ruler in her own right, was most likely his immediate successor. For maybe 2 years, this enigmatic pharaoh ruled in an effort to uphold Theatinist revolution while addressing the pragmatic issues that Akhenaten had left unsolved. Nefertiti's brief rule offers an intriguing glimpse into Egyptian history. The potential for a woman to have handled the political and military issues endangering the kingdom while successfully maintaining and modifying Akhenaten's inventions. However, the restoration forces were already at work. The old priesthood, the military institution, and the administrative bureaucracy had all been marginalized during the Amarna period, but they had not been abolished. Akhenaten's passing presented these influential groups with a chance to undo the religious revolution and reinstate the established order that had benefited them for ages. This intricate web of familial ties and political intrigue gave rise to the child who would grow up to become the most well-known pharaoh in history.